Sadly, it looks like it's time to start again, so let's go ahead and open with prayer, shall we? Father in heaven, as we come before you, we thank you for the preaching that comes from this church. We thank you for the dedication of our pastoral staff to your word. We're just grateful, Father, that we can sit under teaching like that. We're thankful for the emphasis placed on it. And we pray, Father, as we go throughout our week that it would be your word that we look to inform us, to guide us, to instruct us, Lord, in the ways that we should go. We pray that would constantly be on our mind, Lord, Father, thinking, what does your word tell us? What does your word offer for us in any situation that we might run up against? And we pray that our lives would reflect that, Father, and that we would glorify you as we live them out. Amen. All right. So I'm not sure how clear I made this when we started the lesson out, but in my mind, I was thinking I had three different questions that I was sort of asking myself as I began to study this. And I think I mentioned this, but just in case I didn't, I want to do it again. The first is this: why is the law that Moses gave out, why, when we look at it from our perspective today, why is that so, or why at least in some cases does it seem so odd? Why is it so weird, right? Why are there laws that we don't understand, like wearing two different types of clothes, or not being able to trim your beard, or something like that? Why are these things in there? The second was, what does the law tell me as a 21st century believer about the character of God? And then thirdly, what does it mean to me? How does it apply to me in this time, right, as a 21st century Christian? And so the reason I'm reiterating this is because I'm hoping now, this is the fourth week, and we're coming to sort of an end here of one section, and that section is why. What I hope to at least kind of help you answer the question of today is why are there things in the law that seem so odd to me? Why is that? And so that's kind of where we're going today, and then in the future we'll begin to try to answer those other two questions. So I feel like last week I kind of ended on a really rushed note, so I want to recap a couple of things here. And the first is this: I want you to be very clear about this. The law was given to a specific and unique people at a specific and unique time in history, in a specific and unique cultural and religious context for a specific and unique purpose, okay? That's going to be a critical item that you need to understand going forward. The second is this: the law is given as the condition of a bilateral covenant, okay? So remember from Exodus, I think it's 19, God says, if you keep this law, if you keep my commandments, if you obey them, then I will make you into a nation, or I think he calls them a kingdom of priests, right? A people of my possession. And so this is, now there's more that is revealed as we go through. This is in Exodus. As we go through Leviticus and Deuteronomy, we're familiar with the curses and the blessings that come with it. But this is the initial condition of the law. This is a bilateral covenant. It's two parties involved, and the law and later on the sacrifices, they represent the terms and the conditions of one party's obligation on that covenant. Okay? The family of Israel this is their part to keep, and then God has his part to keep, which is making them into a nation and a kingdom of priests and his own people. Okay, the third thing here that I'd like you to sort of get a good grasp on is this: the covenant is not open. We live in a John 3:16 world, okay, where whosoever may come, or whosoever will come, may come. And that influences everything at least for me, it influences the way I look at the Old Testament and the way I've looked at the law in the past. But what I want you to know is that, first of all, let me clarify. We know from the New Testament that it is God's will that no man perish, that all men come to know him and be saved, right? And we know that God never changes, And so we know that in the Old Testament, this the same God, it's the same attitude. It's never been God's desire that any man perish, that all men come to a knowledge of him, okay? But that is not true of the covenant. The covenant has never been open. It's not universal. It is only to the family of Jacob. It's only valid to them, and it's only applicable to them. It was only offered to them. There was no chance for, any other any other nation or anything. They couldn't just decide, you know what, we want to be a kingdom of priests too. We're going to start keeping the law. That was not open. That was not something that applied to them. Therefore, the laws here didn't apply to them. Remember these things also. I think we talked about this last week. The law does not save from sin. You don't get to heaven by following the law. The law is not necessary to worship Jehovah. You can worship without the law. Think about, just let me ask you this. Can you think of any examples of that? So we spent the last 3 weeks talking about how people worship before the law was ever given, right? But think about even after the law was given. Think about Naaman, okay? After he was healed of leprosy, he asked Elijah, was it? I think it was Elijah, if he could take some dirt from Israel back with him, and so that when his master worshiped his God, he could worship Jehovah. I think he was an Assyrian, but I didn't look it up, so I don't remember. But wherever he was at, he wanted to worship the God Jehovah who had cured him of leprosy in his own land, in his own way there. So he didn't have the law. The widow of Zarephath, she worshiped God. The Ninevites, right? When Jonah went to Nineveh, the Ninevites, the Bible tells us they repented. They turned from their sin and they repented in sackcloth and ashes, and God relented. He did not destroy them, and we get the impression that they turned to God, and at least for a generation there, they followed him. But the Bible doesn't tell us that they started following the Israelite law, does it? That's not what they did. They repented. In their hearts, they repented and turned to the Lord. Okay, but the law didn't apply to them. So my point here is that they could worship without the law. It wasn't necessary for that. And then finally, I've tried to show you from the last 3 weeks here that the law was not the institution of human morality. There was a moral code and a moral knowledge before the law was ever given. So the law was not necessary for humans to know what is right from wrong. So then, what am I getting at, right? Why am I telling you all this? What's my point? My point is this. This is going to be, I don't know. I hope this isn't controversial. It might be. I always get nervous when I start saying things because, I'm thinking, I'm not going to let you into my inner secrets here. That's probably just, but if it is controversial, come talk to me and I'll be happy to explain my position. But this is what I'm trying to get past to you. The law is not God's will for humanity. Okay? The law wasn't given to humanity in general. And it wasn't given to make the Israelites righteous people. So if that's the case, what was it given for? And what my argument to you today is this: it wasn't given to make them righteous, but it was given to make them holy. All right? So what do I mean by that? So the idea of holy wouldn't be unique to the nation of Israel at this time or to the family of Jacob. The Canaanites, the Egyptians, the Philistines, anybody that had an organized system of religion would have had some idea of what holy was. They would have been familiar with this concept. And what I'm talking about by holy is the idea that holy things are separate, like your holy utensils that you use, only for worshiping your God, or I don't know. I can't think of so like communion cups, right? We don't drink on Wednesday nights out of the communion cups. In a sense, they're holy. They're set aside for a specific purpose, right? You see where I'm getting at? So that's not new. That didn't come from the Israelite law, this idea of holy. That existed as long as people have been worshiping. They've had the idea of holy. They've had that sense, that meaning of separate, of called for a specific purpose, right? Or used for sacred, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. Okay? So things that are holy are different. And what makes them holy is their purpose. Okay? That's the only thing that makes them holy. You can have a fork that you use every day. That fork's not holy. But the fork that you use for your religious meal or whatever, and you only use it for that. That's the only thing you use it for. That fork is holy. All right? So it's the purpose that it serves is what makes it holy. And so, the pagans would have had an idea of what's holy and all kinds of stuff. So what is holy is what's set aside for the gods, right? And so here comes God. He tells these people, I'm going to make you holy. I'm going to make you a holy nation. So what is he saying? What he's saying is, I'm going to make you different. I'm going to set you aside for a specific purpose. I'm going to make you different. Now, different from what? Is he going to be different from you? Are they going to be different from you sitting here in these little cushy chairs here 3,500 years later? He doesn't need to do that because there's 3,500 years between you. You're already different, right? What is he going to make them different from? He's going to make them different from the cultures and the people that are there present at that time in history in that geographical location. That's what he's setting them apart from. You following me here? Okay. Now, this is where things get changed up a little bit, and you have to kind of think in your head about what's going on, and we'll kind of address this a little bit later, but what's going on around there, because he adds a little bit of a twist, right? So I'm not like a great theologian or anything, but I'm hoping I'm not too far off base here, but follow with me a little bit. So if you have this God, like you're a Canaanite, right, and you have this God, Shemosh, I think is their main God, and he's your God, and you have a holy, a holy place, or like I said earlier, a holy hatchet or a holy fork or something that you only use in the worship of this God, right? So the God himself isn't what's holy. It's the item that you've set aside for this specific person. Does that make sense to you? Okay? So it's nothing inherent in the God that's holy. He's just a God. But the items that you use and the things that you use that you have set apart from the profane that are used to worship him, those are the things that are holy. But when God, we'll see this in Leviticus, right? But when he doesn't necessarily say it in Exodus, but when God tells the Israelites, I want you to be holy, what he says is, I want you to be holy like and because I am holy. So what's going on there? God is basically telling, I did something bad to my thing here. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So he's telling them, you know what? I'm different. And well, what's he different from? He's different from the other gods around at that time, right? That's what he's trying to tell them. And so, how is God different from the gods of the Canaanites and the gods of the Egyptians and the gods of the Philistines and, all this stuff? Any thoughts?
He's living.
So, just as an aside, I had that same thought. I'm not entirely sure that's true, and I'll tell you why. That I know that God's living, but I'm not positive that their gods weren't demons, weren't also living. We know that not the Israelites, but the Egyptians were able to do something with the first few, turning their staffs into snakes and stuff like that. Now, it's possible that was just some sleight of hand or something like that. I'm not entirely sure that, and I'm getting way off base here. I talked to Bob Brown in the past. Bob Brown's one of the missionaries we have to India. And if you talk to him about different things, he will tell you stories that will scare you. That have to do with demonic activity and things like this. So I'm only saying, Brian, what I get the point of what you're saying, but I'm not sure that these other gods that were being worshipped weren't actually or aren't actually beings. And perhaps they're not. I don't know. But I guess what I'm telling you is I'm looking for a different answer. so, well, those are idols, are they not? So is there a difference between idol and gods? I don't know. I shouldn't even brought this up. This is kind of an esoteric thing that I was just thinking about as I was thinking about this class. So let's just say, for sake of purposes, that one big difference is God is alive. We know at least one big difference is if these other gods are alive, that God is supreme, right? He's a God over them. Dan? He's the creator. He's the source of everything. So what I'm trying to get you at, think about these gods that they have. These gods that they have, they're incestuous, they're profane, they're erratic, they're petty. You could just go through all kinds of different poor adjectives, bad adjectives, right, to describe these gods, right? And I think the point that I know it. The point that God's trying to make when he tells these people, be holy like I'm holy, is that God is pure. He is absolutely pure. He's pure physically, he's pure morally, and he's pure ethically. All right? Now, again, keep in mind, God's calling the Israelites to be holy, to be set apart, to be different from the environment they're around. And he's telling them, I want you to be holy, set apart, in the same way that I am. All right, so he wants these Israelites to model this sort of purity that he has. This different. He's saying, I'm different than the gods that these other nations worship. I am morally, ethically perfect. And that's what I want you to be like as well, okay? Well, when we think about that, as we kind of turn these things around, what I want you to do is, if you have opportunity, I guess, as you go through the law, you think about some of these things. Think about what he's calling them to do. And one of the things that comes up here is that, so if God's calling the Israelites to be different from the culture around them, right, to show themselves to be different, I think it's difficult for us to grasp what that truly means unless we know what those cultures around them at the time were like. And that presents us with a little bit of a dilemma, because that's 3,500 years ago, and there's nobody alive today that has a very good grasp of what those cultures were like. We have archaeologists that are digging up pieces of pottery and things like this and making speculations, but that's all it is speculations. We do have some things that are written, the Code of Hammurabi and some other things like this, where we know somewhat about what they're like because they wrote it down, but we don't have reams of information. We're just guessing. It's all speculation. So there's a lot of things that we don't know, and so consequently, we can't really pin this down, but we do know that God is, again, he's calling the Israelites to be holy. He's calling them to be different than the culture around them. And so what do we call that when you're different than the culture around you? That's countercultural, right? He wants them to be countercultural. Think about the people that you know today that are countercultural, right? What are they like? I call them hippies or commies, whatever. I probably shouldn't say that, but But they're not. I mean, but that's what we do, right? With countercultural people, we make sure that we know that, or they know that we don't approve, right? We want them to be just like us. Being countercultural is hard. And the countercultural people that I know, they dress differently than I do. They think differently than I do. They act differently than I do. They live differently than I do. In which some cases that's probably a good thing, but we'll leave that for another day. So so God is calling the Israelites to be countercultural. He's calling them to be different than the culture around them. And I would just add as an aside, I hope we get into this somewhat towards the end here when we start applying this to our present day, but does he not still call his people to be countercultural? Isn't that what, part of what Jesus taught is to be, you're to be different. I mean, think of the Beatitudes, think of the Sermon on the Mount. That's radically different than the world. And so we're still called, we're not called to be a nation, but we are called as God's people to be countercultural. Okay, so as a part of making them holy, I think, or as a part of making them different, as calling them out, I think the main thing is he wants them to be holy. He wants them to be holy in the way that he is holy. He wants them to be pure. But I think we also see a few other things that he's doing with this giving of the law, right? I think we can see this. The law not only sets them apart, but it serves also to demonstrate, and this is in no particular order, right? It serves to demonstrate the righteousness of God. We see that in the Ten Commandments. It's going to serve. Now remember, this is a family of people. This is not a nation. They've been slaves before they were slaves. They were just a hodgepodge family of rednecks. Now they've become great, but they're former slaves. They're moving out. They're not a nation. They're not united. So this law that they're going to get is also going to serve as a national rule of conduct for them. They don't have anything going for them at the moment except for maybe what they picked up in Egypt, right? This law is going to provide for individual and corporate worship. It's going to keep the Jews distinct and set apart from the other nations around them. It reveals and condemns sin, and it reveals the need for grace. Okay? So let's just kind of look at these one at a time. This is a problem. Okay, so I got a screen here with no notes on it. But I think the reason I put this screen on here is the first thing is that this law serves as a national code of conduct. Norman Rockwell did a series on I think of the amendments or something like that, the freedoms that we have. This is a picture I picked off. Anyway, but think about that. You have this group of people here that need to come under the idea of being a nation. How do you accomplish that? What do you need to be a nation? So you need something that unites you, and one of the things that unites a people, a nation, is in our country we call it the Constitution. I don't know of any nation that's around today that doesn't have some sort of common law. Right? If they don't have common laws, if they don't even adhere, if they have a set of laws and they don't adhere to them very closely, we call them third world, right? That's kind of the definition. So any civilized nation, any nation that is going to function even in a partial sort of manner has to have a code, a standard set of rules by which they operate. It might be, you know what, here's our Constitution, we're going to do whatever our dictator tells us. But there's still some sort of national law to all this. And so when God gives this law to the Jews, he's giving them a method of uniting, something around which to unite. Now, oddly enough, in the law, what do we see as preeminent is the worship of Jehovah, the worship of Yahweh. And so even in giving them something that unites them, he's uniting them around himself. But the law itself will serve as a stabilizing factor for the nation. Oh man, this is crazy. So I'm going to have to go off memory here because I tell you, me and publisher do not get along for any length of time. Anyway, so what else does the law do? It gives them the opportunity to worship corporately, and it gives them a method to worship individually. Okay? Why is that important? Well, again, it's a unifying factor. Just think to yourself about what we do here at Southern View. Okay? Every week we come together corporately to worship. And when we do so, I don't know about you, but when I come here, I feel like I worship in a way that's, like I can worship at home in the mornings, before I go to work, or if I'm sleeping in when I come home, if I set aside a little time to read my Bible and study and pray, right? I can worship at home. But there's something different about coming together with a group. I feel like the worship that I have is more, it's definitely more formal, but it's more structured. It's accomplished in a more organized manner. And I'm sitting here worshiping with all these other people that are worshiping the same God that I'm worshiping, right? There's just something different about it. Would you agree? Okay, so the corporate worship is kind of important. And then afterwards, we're talking in the hallways, we're fellowshipping. I'm building relationships with people. It's fun, right? I like that. It's good to do. So that's good. But think about I think in like another month or 6 weeks, we're going to have the church retreat. Okay, that's like our high holy day. Maybe New Year's Eve fun night is a high holy day. But other than that, it's the church retreat, right? We all gather together at the church retreat. For the most part, I think all of us look forward to it. There's going to be food. There's going to be games and talking and different stuff like that. And there's a worship service. So we all gather there. We come from whatever we're doing, and most of us don't spend the night. But imagine if we did, right? And let's say you were coming from hundreds of miles away, right? And to see these people. And anyway, the point I'm trying to make is think about how that affects you. Think about just how going to the church retreat affects you, if of course you go. And if you don't, maybe you should try it sometime and see what it's like. But you're there with all these fellow believers, and you're there for the same purpose. You're there to fellowship with one another. You're there to worship the Lord and to build on that, to sort of, it's like a family reunion, isn't it? Only better, because these are people, for the most part, that you like, not that just you're related to. So, I mean, it's a building opportunity, and I think so. In the law, it was written for the Jews; they had to come together 3 times a year for these great big festivals, and so from all over the country they would come, packing their kids and their dogs and all this stuff, and bringing them together. They were eating together and living together for this, the length of these festivals, whatever. And it was a great unifying experience. Again, unified around the very center of their unification was the worship of Jehovah. Okay, so that thread of Jehovah and worshiping Him and His holiness runs throughout the law. And all the little things that you look at, as you read through the law, you should be looking for that. How is God showing us what's new about Him? And then in the individual worship, so it's very prescribed, right? When we get into Leviticus, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? We've been at this for a month now, and we're still not even in Leviticus. But there's the ritual sacrifice for worshiping God is very prescribed, very rigid. Why would that be? Again, what's the purpose of the law? Oh, come on, you're all right. It's okay to say. What? Huh? To make them holy, right? To set them apart. Okay, so imagine, if you will, now we're doing a little speculation here, but we know that the way these other people worshiped, we know that it was ecstatic, right? We know that they worshiped in male and female prostitution. We know that they had orgies. We know that it was just all kinds of craziness going on. And yet, here you have the Israelite, if he's going to go worship his God, it is organized, and there isn't any kind of flipping out or anything like this. He knows what he's going to do as he goes in there. He knows the process, and it's the same for everybody. There's nothing crazy going on. You know, I'm at a loss for the word here, but it's very precise. It's very, very regimented and completely different, I think, than the worship going on in these other places. Right? It's holy. It's different. It's set apart. And God is showing the other nations even by the individual worship that the Jews go through, how different of a God he is. As Gary said this morning, God is not a God of chaos. And he's proclaiming this to not only to the Jews, but to the people around who know what their practice is. They can see that. There's no chaos going on here. This is all spelled out, and everybody knows what's going on. Please be notes on this one. Nothing. Okay. Okay, so the other purpose of the law, as we've just been hammering on, is to keep the Jews separate, to keep them different. So we know in the law that the Jews are forbidden from marrying, right, outside of Israel. That's forbidden. You're not allowed to do that. Okay? But what else do we have going on? Well, so we've got these crazy laws, right, that we don't understand. We've got this idea that you can't wear clothing of two different materials. You can't trim the corners of your beard. You can't have two different cows, different types of cows mate together. Okay? Are these laws, do I know enough about ancient culture to say that's what the purpose? No, I don't. Okay? But can you imagine? Right? You're over at your Amalekite friend's house, and he says, hey, I got this, coat I'm going to give to Goodwill. You want to take it? No, I'm sorry, man. I can't wear that coat. It's got polyester and nylon in it. What are you talking about? Why can't you wear a coat that's got not polyester? Well, my law, the law I got from my God, says I can't wear a coat with two different materials in it. That's nuts. That's nuts. You're different. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I think that's the point, right? Now, it could be that maybe that's an opportunity to say, well, you know what? The reason I can't do that is because my God is holy, and he wants me to be holy. And when he says holy, he's perfectly pure. And so therefore, the clothing I wear has to be perfectly pure, one type or another. I'm making all this up. This is all speculation, just in case you're wondering. But wouldn't it be an opportunity to talk about something like that? Is that what happened to the Jews and the people around there? I have no idea. But, you can see the thread of God's holiness and the thread of his character runs through the law if you just apply a little bit of sort of thinking about it, right? And whether that whole thing about teaching his holiness out of one type of material is accurate or not, I know this, that had to set the Jews apart. It had to set them apart. It had to make them different. High standard. It shows the high standards of God, right? It should show, I guess what I'm trying to say is shows the standards of God's righteousness. Again, we see this in the Ten Commandments, all right? And the Ten Commandments are interesting in that as we see the Ten Commandments, he comes out and he says that we all know the big ones, sort of, if we start from a human perspective, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife or his donkey or his house or anything like that. But that's not where God starts. Now, presuming that God starts with what he feels most important, when he brings out the law, he starts with what normally we would term so a lot of times we break the law down into what? Moral law, civil law, and ceremonial law, right? So the Ten Commandments we would consider the moral law, right? That tells us how we should act morally. And he starts this out. Is that really what time it is? Oh my goodness. He starts this out by saying, what's the first commandment? Yeah, no other gods before me. Right? The first thing he says is when he says to Moses, he says, you go tell him, you give him this law, you tell him it's for me. And the first thing he says is, I am the Lord your God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Okay? The whole law that he gives, the moral law, is prefaced off the fact that he is God. And the next, I don't know how many, but the next 4 anyway, no other gods before me, no graven images, right? Not take my name in vain. What? Remember the Sabbath. All of these have to do with him. So the law emanates from God. And that in itself is holy. That's different. That's separate. If you read through, like we know that the law of Hammurabi, I think his name is, some Babylonian king existed before that. Incidentally, so that, we know that what they call the lex talionis, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that didn't originate with the Israelite law. That came before. That was a law that we find in this lex talionis thing. All right? So we see stuff like that, but when you read through that, we got this king named Hammurabi or whatever, and he's telling you, yeah, I'm getting my stuff directly from the gods. And now I'm going to regurgitate it to you because I'm such a great king, and here's my law. But that's not the way the law of Israel comes. The law of Israel comes and says, this right here, this is from the mouth of God to you. And he bases it all on himself. The first 4 or 5 laws are all about him. That's different in itself. That's holy. That's set apart from the nations around them, in that the Israelite law is based in the character of their God. That's different. And it shows the standards, okay? The law, I'm trying to do this without notes here, so the law is given so that we see that sin is I should just go back. We see sin. We see its consequences. We have knowledge of it, right? And so the law is given. And when we see the law, now so there's a moral code before the law is given. It exists. It's out there. But it's if there's no law, right, it's got to be ambiguous. I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I don't exactly know what the consequences are or whatever. But when the law comes, that all changes, right? We see at least for the Jews, things are lined out morally, and we see what God expects, and now we have a standard. We have a marker at which to aim at, and when we start trying to hit that marker, we find out, well, I can't do that. So the law demonstrates to us the condemnation. The law condemns us, or it doesn't condemn us, but it condemned the Jews, and they were able to see that they could not keep the law. And again, we're going to talk about this more, but I want to reiterate the fact that in the law, there was no, well, you know what? We'll just go on to this one. The law showed the need for grace. Okay? So in the law, just think about the 10 commandments. Okay? For the first commandment, thou shalt not, or not, okay, whatever commandment it is, the one that says thou shalt not kill, right? We know, so in the law, the penalty for murder is death. We know that. Okay? But what about, like, thou shalt not covet? That's in the law. It's in the moral law. So if you find yourself coveting, what are you going to do about it? There's no remedy in the law. There's not a spelled out sacrifice where you can go and give a sacrifice and be forgiven for coveting. It's not there. Or adultery, or whatever, pick your poison. It's not there for any outright act of rebellion, of breaking of the moral law. There's no sacrifice that will save you. There's no remedy. Okay? Again, this may be a little controversy as well. I told you this last week. I don't know if you caught it. as I read through the law, what I see is there is remedy for breaking the covenant. If you're outside of the covenant, you're to be put out, okay, of the nation. But there are remedies. There are sacrificial remedies for you to be reestablished in the covenant. But there is no remedy in the law for sin. Now, again, if you read through, you will see, like when we get to Leviticus, the very first sacrifice, the burnt offering, God says, and if you give this, the guy will come, he'll give this burnt offering, he'll put his hands on the bull or the goat or whatever it is, and cut its throat and sacrifice it, and he will be atoned for. Right? And I'll smell the aroma coming up to me, and it will be pleasant, and I will atone for him. But at the very best, okay, that's a general admission that I am a sinner and I want to get back in your good graces. At its worst case, it's I know that I am ritually unclean, and I want to be clean again according to the covenant, so I'm going to offer this sacrifice. But it is not a remedy for any specific act of what the theologians call a high-handed sin. Okay? There's nothing there. And so the law teaches if there's no remedy, there's no physical remedy you can perform, no act of absolution, what is your only other option? I was talking to one of my kids in kids club. I was going through this the other day, and I was not this specifically, but we were talking about, and I can't remember now what we said, but we were talking about the death of Christ, and so what do you do if you can't do anything to gain forgiveness? And the little kids looked at me and he said, I give up. And I was like, exactly. I don't think he had a clue what I was talking about, but that's exactly right. There's nothing you can do. You've got to give up. You have to say, look, Lord, if you're not going to forgive me for this, I'm done. I'm out. So the law teaches, it shows us the need for grace. All right? I would love to know where those notes. I swear to you this morning, when I shut this thing down, this was full of notes. In conclusion, then, I just want to tell you this. So we see these things that the law teaches, but throughout the thread of the law, we have God's character always behind it, which is what we're going to talk about next. Okay, for the next couple of weeks, we'll see. But God's character floating, and His holiness, His purity. We see that floating throughout the law here. But what I really want you to get across for this particular part is this, is that the law, again, it has all these elements to it, but it applies specifically to these people at this time. And so when we run across things in the law that we don't understand, and we need to, and when our friends say, well, I don't want to believe in the law because, you can't, it says you got to kill all gay people, or you can't trim your beard or whatever, keep in mind what it was for a specific purpose. This isn't God talking to the world in general. It's God setting down something for the Jews because He wants them to be different than everybody else around them at a specific point in history. Okay? And I lost the other part that I was talking about, but I want to give you an example, maybe a couple examples here. The first is this. There are 3 places in the law where it mentions that you cannot eat a kid boiled in its mother's milk. Isn't that nuts? Okay, and I don't know this for a fact, but I've been told that the Jewish people have built up a whole thing around this. So if you go to a kosher deli, right, you can't even get meat and cheese on the same plate because it violates the spirit of this particular law. And we look at that from our 21st century viewpoint and say, what in the world would the law have to do with boiling a baby goat, in its mother's milk? That doesn't make any sense at all. What does that have to do with making people righteous? Well, keep in mind, the law isn't meant to make people righteous. Law is meant to make people holy, to set them apart. Okay? And so when you think of it from that perspective and you start doing a little bit of digging on this, what you find out is it's possible. Now, this isn't known for sure, but there is some speculation that boiling a kid in its mother's milk was a religious practice of the people around the Israelites at that same time. They did it in a worship service to some god. So if that's the case, it makes perfect sense why God might say you can't boil a calf or a kid in its mother's milk. And we've just lost that knowledge from 3,500 years ago. There's other evidence that this may not be what it means at all, but this may be it's not a metaphor. No, not a simile. Something you say, euphemism. It's a euphemism for the idea that you don't let something stay. So in other words, the law commands us to, or when the law commands the Jews to bring their first fruits, to bring the best that they have right away, it's what it's telling the Jews. It's a euphemism for saying, don't dawdle when you do this. Bring this stuff immediately. I know it's lost on us. We're 3,500 years in the future. We don't get the euphemism. But there's a possibility is there. Are either one of these two ideas right? I have no idea. I don't know enough about the culture of that time to say. But what I'm pointing out is we see these laws and we think to ourselves, I don't understand that. That's just nuts. And I submit to you that if we were looking at anybody else's laws, we'd probably see the same thing. Right? If we had laws from that time that we could look at, we'd find stuff in there that we'd think, this is nuts, this is crazy. But because it's the law to the Israelites, we have this misconception that that's what made them righteous. And that is not the case. The law never was intended to make them righteous. It was only intended to make them different, to make them holy. And I had another example for you, but we're out of time, so thanks for coming. I'll see you next week.